Okay, so welcome back to the room. Thanks again to the first panel. We've an equally great panel here, panel 2, Remedies and Making Complaints. And we all love a good complaint. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to seek shares. I'll read out the bio, the speaker will come up, and then again we'll have questions at the end, okay? So Dr. Ciara O'Connell, the Senior Inspector of Prisons, Officer of Prisons. Ciara, in the role she's held since late 2020. Prior to this, Ciara was Deputy Principal Investigator at the PRILA project based out of Trinity College, where she examined the experience of prison oversight from the perspective of people in prison and prison staff. You're welcome up, Dr. Ciara.
Hi everybody. Thank you to IPRT, IHREC, and to all of you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm going to speak about the role of the Office of the Inspector of Prisons, and I'll call us the OIP, so when you hear me say that, you know what that is, and kind of what we do with inspections, but then also how that plays into our oversight role with complaints. So we're a human rights monitoring body, and we have several functions. We carry out inspections of prisons, we investigate deaths in custody, we have oversight of the prisoner complaint system, and we respond to confidential correspondence from people in prison who write to us. Our prison inspection function is set out in the Prisons Act, Part 5, which you can see up there. And this really lets us, it basically sets out a requirement for us to regularly inspect prisons. And to do this, it lets us enter any prison at any time. And we can access any part of the prison. And then as part of our inspections, we are permitted to bring issues of concern to the governor of the prison, to the Director General of the Irish Prison Service, and or the Minister for Justice. And we've done this even recently. The Act also sets out responsibilities for prison governors, for officers, for people working in prisons, and people in prison to engage with the Inspector of Prisons, and really when we request information for us to supply us with that information. So I'm the inspections lead, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we do on our inspections. We have 4 main focus areas that we look at. So when we knock on the gate for a general inspection, I think Governor Conroy has had that experience recently. He knows that we're going to come look at 4 main focus areas. So you'll see respect and dignity, safety and security, health and well-being, and purposeful activity and resettlement. So this means we're looking at things like conditions in the prison, relationships and culture in the prison, the use of restricted regimes. So when people are removed from the general population, how is that done? How is that made safeguarded? The quality and standard of healthcare, access to meaningful human contact and purposeful activity in the prison, and how the prison supports people to reintegrate into society. So as you can see there in the breakdown of our focus areas, underneath safety and security, we do a deep dive into complaints. So we kind of look at what complaints have been happening in the prison and follow them through and speak to people who have submitted the complaints. And I'll just say before I go in deeper in complaints, the role of the staff member at the Office of the Inspector of Prison is a very privileged one. We're able to go onto the landings, into cells, and speak to prison officers and people in prison who are often experiencing a very vulnerable moment in their life, and they share those vulnerable moments with people that they've never met before. So we know that when we go into that prison that there's a trust there that we honestly we don't deserve, and we're given it. So we do take very good care of it, and we try to make sure that it's something that we can give back to. So when we're done with inspection reports, we always make a plain English version for people in prison. We have them translated into multiple languages, and we personally go to every door in every prison inspected, unlock back, and pop them under the doors. So we do want to make sure that that relationship between the OIP and people in prison and staff is really, really strong. For staff, we make infographics. We work with IPS to put it up on their portal so the staff can see at a snapshot the findings from an inspection. So there's a lot of this relationship building that we're really keen to do. So let's crack on to complaints, which already started to be a bit of a topic today. So the OIP oversees prisoner complaints. We do not investigate complaints. Prison staff sometimes think we do, prisoners think we do, but we do not investigate complaints. We actually cannot. It's in the legislation that we cannot. But when there's 6 different types of complaints, Category A complaints are independently investigated. So the IPS has a panel of investigators. It's quite a small panel. I think they wish it was a bit bigger. But they investigate Category A, and then all other categories, as you can see there, B through F, are categorized by the governor and internally investigated. That being said, though, the OIP can elect to investigate and examine the situation around a complaint. So we can't look at the prisoner's individual complaints, but if we see a lot of complaints about the same thing, that might trigger us to respond in some sort of way, in a more of a systemic way. So the OIP receives monthly returns from each prison that provide the details and number of complaints for each prison. But in particular, in our oversight of Category A complaints, we get more detail. We get everything that's happening around that complaint. And Category A complaints, as you can see up there in the top, are categories of a serious nature that involve incidents such as assault or use of excessive force or ill treatment, racial abuse, or discrimination. As part of our oversight role of complaints, we also look at aspects of procedural fairness in investigation of Category A complaints. So we're looking at, are all witnesses interviewed by the independent investigator? If the guards, are they notified if this incident requires it? Is CCTV footage saved? And is all relevant documentation included in the investigation file? And then our job, kind of watching from above, is to see how does this investigation carry on? What happens with it? So when we're on inspection, the inspector is able to examine in greater detail how the complaint system works in each particular prison. So we're up here as a helicopter, but when we go on inspection, we're going to see what's happening on the ground in this prison with complaints. So to do that, we engage with people in prison and staff to see what they think about the complaints process. We speak with people in prison, we speak with staff, we carry out digital surveys. We're probably the only inspector I think that I know of that is going around on the landings with tablets, digital tablets, and asking questions. Do you trust the prisoner complaint system? Would you use it? Those kinds of things. And we ask the staff the same thing. We ask people, do they feel safe to complain in prisons? How do staff support people to raise complaints? And we also want to know things like, how does the prison use complaints data to identify patterns and recurring issues in the prisons? So through doing all this in our inspections, we're able to develop a picture of how the complaint system is working overall. Unfortunately, though, for many years, since at least 2016, when our office carried out a thematic review of the Irish Prison Service complaint system, we've really raised concerns about the functionality of it and really repeatedly deemed it unfit for purpose. So reflecting on that, it's worth really asking the question, what makes a good functioning complaint system? So international best practice sets out a number of criteria. That it be a complaint system for prisoners should be available, accessible, and confidential. It should be expedient, so it should move quickly. You shouldn't be waiting long periods of time to find out outcomes of complaints. It should be independent with the right to appeal, and it should be effective. It should do something. It shouldn't just be there for the sake of being there. So thinking about this practically, this means there's a lot of things that have to go right in a complaint system to make sure it aligns with best practice. And I kind of wanted to go through each one of these 4 big themes of what a good complaint system looks like to talk about some questions that the OIP asks related to those areas. So from the start, looking at availability, accessibility, and confidentiality, it's basically, how do you make a complaint and get it off the landing in a confidential way? Just pretty straightforward stuff. There are a lot of considerations that we look at on inspections to kind of answer that question. So I'm going to tell you a load of questions that we try to answer. So how do people in prison learn about the complaint system and how it works? If they want to make a complaint, how do they get a complaint form? What languages are the forms in? Right? Very important. And if they can't read or write, how can they submit the form? And just to note there, based off your presentation earlier, we do have examples where prisoners write into us in the Rule 44s confidentially and submit complaints to us in other languages. So we can't investigate that complaint, but before we reply, we get it translated for them and send it back to them so then they can submit it. So sometimes we find ourselves in this loop of how do we help this person do something with their complaint form. Are forms freely available on the landings, or do people in prison have to go up to an officer in front of everyone and declare they want to complain and get a complaint form? Are there sealable envelopes available to ensure a complaint isn't read by a member of staff or anyone else who really shouldn't read it? Is there a complaint box on the landing, and is it secured with a lock? And here's just from one prison, a sample of several different ways a complaint box might look. And you can see here, like if a complaint form is several A4 pages, how would you fold that and get it into one of some of these slots? And some of these locks, are they locked, or the openings are sometimes so big you could maybe just pluck it right back out, right? So there's just in one prison, if you're a new prisoner, you wouldn't really know what you're getting yourself into with all those boxes. Who has access to the complaint box? Is it a member of staff who regularly works and has a lot of interactions with people in prison? Or is it someone who's sufficiently senior, who's maybe managing from afar, isn't necessarily involved in the day-to-day running of landing? Are people in prison provided with a copy of their complaint form? And do they think they may be punished or treated differently if they do submit a complaint? So second, complaints must be investigated and resolved quickly. And this is really a problem for Category A complaints in our context, where it can take months to appoint an investigator because of the small number of investigators who are on the panel, and sometimes more than a year to conclude an investigation. In this time, prisoners and staff may not be informed about the progress or the status of that complaint, and for both parties, that has knock-on effects on their living conditions and their working conditions. Also, delays in investigations mean that key witnesses who were party saw what happened in an allegation of an incident may be released from prison. And so then they can't participate in the investigation, and then that has knock-on effects on the outcome of the investigation. And third, of central importance to assessing the functioning of a complaint system is the extent to which it operates independently. So really what we're considering here is how are complaints categorized and how are investigators appointed? Are governors applying the correct categories to complaints? So when we're on inspection, we're looking at the categories applied and we're seeing, do they align with what that first slide showed you of, is this actually a category B or was there an assault allegation? Is this actually 4 different types of complaints, but it was only categorized as one? Because remember, some of them are independent and some of them are internal, so it does matter how these are categorized. For complaints that are not Category A complaints, how are internal investigations safeguarded to ensure procedural fairness? So if a person in prison raises an allegation against a nurse, and that's a Category D complaint, and then the CNO, the chief nurse officer, is assigned to investigate it, how are we sure that there's procedural safeguards around that process? Where am I now? Sometimes I get worked up. Okay, let's see. I lose my spot. In the case of an independent investigation carried out by an IPS-appointed investigator, does the governor uphold the investigator's findings? And that's not always the case. And can people appeal complaint outcomes? What avenues exist to do this? And are they sufficiently independent to the prison service? Finally, looking at overall effectiveness of the complaint system. A complaint system, as we all know, can only be effective if people trust it. And that's really a significant issue in the Irish context. The inspectorate has on many occasions across the state encountered low levels of trust and reluctance to engage with the complaint system. We've reported on people in prison indicating that the complaint system is open to intimidation, that they fear reprisal for engaging with the complaint system, and that at times they feel compelled to withdraw complaints they've already submitted. This is really a great concern to the inspector and further reinforces the need to reconsider the complaint system in its current form. So with all these questions and challenges, I didn't give you many answers, I just gave you loads of questions. The OIP is actively working with the Office of the Ombudsman and the Irish Prison Service to bring proposals to the Department of Justice that would introduce revised legislation to bring about an effective prisoner complaint system in Ireland. So it's active, it's been a long-standing project, but I think there's a lot of momentum building up around it right now. The Inspectorate will continue to engage in this multi-party effort to align the Irish Prison Service complaint system with international best standards. And I'll leave it there. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you, Ciara. Just a couple of comments before we move on. The lower levels of trust can be a big one. People having legitimate complaints but afraid to make them for fear of transfer. We see that in direct provision centres also. People in power don't like when a complaint goes against them and there's consequences. So a lot of complaints they don't make them and they just suffer on. It's important as well. I remember in 2005, Michael McDowell was the Minister for Justice. You remember that? And we were in Cork Prison at the time, and he came down to have a look at the prison. But obviously they had noticed the place was immaculate. All the overcrowding ended. The place was painted. It was divine looking. Do you know what I mean? So it's important when you're inspecting a prison that you can rock up unannounced. Otherwise you're not going to get the clear picture. Myself and my wife Gillian, we'll be interviewing Dr. Alice Edwards. She's the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture. And as part of that group, they can rock up to any member state prison unannounced, and they get the real view then of what it's like. There's no preparation to clean up the place or to cover up anything, and so yeah, it's great work. We move on. Thank you. So our next speaker is Jacqui Durkin, who was the interim prisoner ombudsman in Northern Ireland. Jacqui was appointed in March 2024 this year, in addition to her appointment as Chief Inspector of Criminal Justice in Northern Ireland since 2019. So two roles, two important roles. The recruitment of a new substantive prisoner ombudsman is underway. Criminal Justice Inspection Northern Ireland independently and impartially inspects places of detention in Northern Ireland, including prisons, juvenile justice centres, courts and police custody. So welcome up, Jacqui.
Just going to check everything works. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for the invitation to participate today. I'm here with the Director of Operations from the Prisoner Ombudsman's Office, Valerie McCloskey, and I've warned Valerie that if there are any difficult questions, she'll be handling them. So basically, Ciara's job and what the Inspector of Prisons in Ireland does is very similar to what CJI does in Northern Ireland, and to be very honest, which I always like to be, I'm providing an interim role for the Prisoner Ombudsman at the minute, but it's definitely not doing or attempting to do two full-time jobs. So we are recruiting, as James said, closes today. So if anybody's interested and you're a real whiz, I'm really hoping we're able to appoint someone very soon. So just in terms of the history of the Prisoner Ombudsman's Office and how things work in Northern Ireland. So just by way of a little bit of background, we have 4 prisons in Northern Ireland on 3 sites. We have the high security Maghaberry prison, we have McGilligan prison up in the northwest, and we have Highbankwood Secure College and Women's Prison on the outskirts of Belfast that houses young adult men and women. Like I suspect every country in Europe, the prison population has increased since the pandemic, and it isn't going to change anytime soon by any of the projections that we see, unless there is that vital upstream work about alternatives to custody. The comments that were made earlier about families being fractured, particularly by parents being in prison, resonates very much of what's happening in Northern Ireland. There are about 1,400 prisoners, said 90 women, 50 young men, roughly, and about half of those are on remand. So we have a very high remand population. So we find with delay in the criminal justice system that a lot of those people are being released from prison time served. So no opportunity for addressing offending behaviour, no engagement in programmes, and guess what? They're back in too quickly. So that's just a little view of the prison estate, a little bit of background. So the Prisoner Ombudsman's Office in Northern Ireland was established in 2005 on the back of a major review of prisons. I don't think I need to tell anybody in the room that the criminal justice system, including prisons, prosecution and police, have undergone many transformations over the last couple of decades. So it's a very small team. I like to say they're small but mighty. There's 8 investigation officers and 3 admin support team in the admin support team. The Prisoner Ombudsman's appointment is an appointment by the Minister of Justice. It is independent and impartial. The staff of the Ombudsman's Office are Department of Justice civil servants who are seconded to the Prisoner Ombudsman's Office. So I think it's fair to say that we are experiencing a lot of change. I'm there in an interim role. We're expecting a new ombudsman. There's been quite a lot of change in staffing levels. As you can imagine, the work that they do is not easy work, and it's not for everyone. There's been a big investment by Valerie in professionalising and professional training for investigators and how they go about their work. But sometimes, as you know, in civil service roles, people come into jobs and it's not really the job that they thought it was, and therefore they can transfer back into the main department. So the Prisoner Ombudsman has 2 key roles. There's a standing commission from the prison service to investigate deaths in custody, but also investigate complaints, and the key commissioning for that work is around the prison rules, and it sets out the duties and boundaries of the office. So in terms of who makes complaints, It's just an overview of the workload at the minute. So as you can see from that slide, I'm not going to read everything on the slide, but you can see one of the issues that the office has to deal with is you can have a cluster of complaints from one individual prisoner, and that's what they're dealing with at the minute. The danger for me is, or something that I'm very aware of, is there is that potential that is that person crying wolf? Is there substance to their complaints? And as you can imagine, you have to treat every individual complaint as it has to be investigated properly. Sometimes you can group similar topics together, but it's about making sure that you're not dismissive of that complaint because there's maybe 20 others very similar to them. And I always think you often find there is a nugget of truth somewhere in among all that, and it's the finding what that is about and how do you remedy that. We have a separated regime in McGabry prison, so we have Republic and Loyalist prisoners separated from the general prison population in bush and row houses. And some of the issues for them, the complaints are channeled to the Prisoner Ombudsman's office through their representatives. And complaints from the general population, as you can see, make up the bulk. But visitors can also complain, so next of kin or concerned parents can also contact the Prisoner Ombudsman's office and raise complaints. And in terms of what those complaints are about and how they go about making them, there's a free phone number on each. They can phone from each prison landing, so it isn't discounted from their own personal account for making calls and talking other expenditure. So they can phone the office, and around about 90% of complaints come into the office that way. So they're logged and then they're investigated, and the remainder comes in through letter. As I said, relatives can make complaints to the office on a prisoner's behalf. I think one of the recent trends that we have seen are concerned parents constantly ringing the office, concerned about their loved one in prison and the care and treatment that they're receiving. In terms of trends and what the complaints are about. So a lot of issues raised, as you would expect, about treatment. These these numbers will not add up to the previous slide, but in terms of major topics and things that are frequently complained about, treatment, obviously, discipline where they've received an adverse report, complaints at the prison service, their response to their complaint. So it's only after the prison service complaints process has been exhausted that a prisoner can refer a complaint to the Prisoner Ombudsman's office. And a number about searches and checks, so alarms going off at night or checks during the night, and missing property, which I think is a common issue in every prison. But one of the more recent issues that has come into the fore are complaints about body scanners. So body scanners were introduced in prisons in McGabry and McGilligan, and in the young men's prison the body scans aren't used for women prisoners, but the use of those, it's becoming an emerging trend, though the prison service are doing a review at the minute of the implementation of the body scanners. So in relation as to why does it matter that you have an independent and an impartial Prisoner Ombudsman's office? So there clearly is that issue about confidence. It's about checks and balances and making sure that there is a system in place that prisoners and their families can be confident in, that if they aren't getting a satisfactory response or they feel that they're not being treated seriously, they can raise their complaint with the Prisoner Ombudsman's office. We would try to reach, if we can, to reach a common sense and an amicable as you possibly can approach to resolving issues. But it's important that it's also used as a mechanism to improve services, to improve complaint handling, to improve administration within the prison, and making sure that they're clear about if something has gone wrong, why it's gone wrong, and to try and make sure it doesn't happen again. And it's clearly, as most speakers have said, it is about upholding human rights and the OPCAT principles and making sure that everyone in detention is treated with dignity and respect. And Ciara, I think you mentioned about systemic issues as well. So for me, the Prisoner Ombudsman's Office has a vital role in that network of oversight of treatment and care of people in detention. So whether that's through independent monitoring board members, whether it's through criminal justice inspection, everyone has a rich mine of data and finding out what is going on in our prisons, what are the issues that are raising concerns and complaints, and are prisoners able to be confident in the remedies that are available to them. Thank you.
Thanks to Jacqui there again. I'm going to move on quickly because I know Damien is next and he has to go. So I know Damien, I interviewed Damien on the Two Norries podcast back in the day, and he's the director of Oberstown, a role he was appointed in 2021. Before this he served as interim director and former deputy director of Oberstown, extensive working knowledge and experience working with children in detention which stretches back over 30 years. So you're welcome up, Damien.
Thank you, James. I suppose my biggest challenge now is standing still, so we'll see how it goes. But look, it's just an honour and a privilege, I suppose, at the outset to be here on behalf of the young people in Oberstown and representing their voice at such a critical event, I think. And maybe last week we had a pre-planning meeting for this, and the question was asked, is anyone using slides? And I said, yeah, I'll present slides. I don't think anyone else was doing it at that point, and I said, trust you to be awkward, Damien. But it's okay to be awkward, and it's okay to be awkward at an event like this, because there's movers and shakers, there's leaders, there's people with responsibilities, there's people with authority in this room. And so long as we continue to accept the status quo as the status quo, then we're neglecting our responsibility a little bit. There's an opportunity to be there's an opportunity to be innovative, there's an opportunity to do something different, there's an opportunity to test the current status quo and see what we can do for a very, very marginalised group of people. So look, I'm going to take on a whistle-stop tour of what it is, what we do in Oberstown, some of our processes, some of the impact, and I'm going to try and bring the voice of the young people into the room, because we are limited in terms of the young people, because anonymity is key to the young people, so they can't be present here today, so I will try and represent them to the best of my ability. Cool. So look, we're North County Dublin, 60-acre site, capacity of 46 young people, 40 males and 6 females, in small residential units with a maximum of 8 young people in each unit. Try and run in a family type atmosphere. Kids all go to school, kids all do activities in the evening, and I suppose the whole principle being we operate within this framework called KEHOP, which we look after their care needs, education needs, health needs, offending behaviour needs, and preparation for discharge. And within that then, what we're trying to do is maximise their potential, give them the tools necessary to contribute to society when they leave again. So that's a very brief introduction to it. Our purpose and vision is there, it's set out in legislation, but just want you to pay attention to values 1, 2 and 5. We place young people at the very centre, at the heart of what we do. In terms of young people, we acknowledge their right to participate and be leaders in what goes on the campus for them, and I suppose we work in partnership to fulfil our shared vision, because they are, I suppose, key collaborators in what goes on the campus, and that word has come up a couple of times today in relation to collaboration and co-creation. When you think of some of the adversarial relationships that exist in the world today, it gets you nowhere. If you're able to do something together, you're able to move things on, and that's a really important feature of life. I'm not going to go into this, but the slides will be available, but the first link, I suppose, is a link to our participation strategy, which sets out the principles upon which we were going to build participation, how we were going to deliver on campus. And the second one then sets out the Children's Rights Policy Framework, which is a set of 12 rules against which we are measured on an annual basis by IHREC. It's a strange word, rules. They're actually policies, and I suppose they go from care to behaviour management, facilities, environment, etc. We've just had a full 4-day inspection in mid-June there, so we'll see how that went once the feedback comes out. I suppose before I get into that, then the key to action, and I suppose the participation strategy and the Children's Rights Policy Framework, was the employment of an advocacy officer on campus. an independent advocacy officer who represents the voice of the campus, a lady called Grania Smith, and those of you who've met her will know she's a force of nature. She can't be here today, she's on leave, but she advocates for the young people, represents their voice wherever possible, and there's a number of processes that allow that to take place. We're also involved with EPIC, we're also involved with the Ombudsman for Children, and we also have engagement with GSOC. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the impact and the effect, I suppose, of advocacy, the young people's participation in advocacy on campus. You consider the first image there, that's the campus council. So no different to any other school, I suppose. We have a very active campus council who meet regularly with members of the senior management team, members of the management team, and bring issues to the table that can't be resolved locally in relation to, let's say, one of the key issues that comes up is access to Netflix and stuff like that, access to different types of food and stuff like that. And one of the key developments in the last year has been the whole issue of a food conference we had. Any of you who've had the pleasure or mispleasure, I suppose, of been in a residential institution throughout your time will know that the value of food is really important over time. The quality, the quantity, the availability, what it looks like, what it tastes like, all that stuff is really important. And it's no different to our kids out in Oberstown. So as part of this food conference, they were able to lay it on the table, excuse the pun. These are some of the challenges we're having with the food. We brought in the executive chef, we brought in the catering team, and what it led to was a systemic change in Oberstown in relation to how people's rostered worked, how menu choices worked, how menu rotation worked, and it was all achieved through the power of the campus council. Something that was really important, and I suppose Grania supporting young people to do that, to advocate for their rights was key to that. In terms of the Board of Management then, the Board of Management, there's a young persons council a young people's committee who get to meet with the board on a monthly basis, to get to meet with the chair of the board and specific children reps in relation to that. And again, it's another process whereby they can use a socially acceptable method for effect and change. And what's really important about that is that if young people start to raise issues and we blank them or we ignore them, well then they fall out of that system. If we pay attention to the issues that they're raising and we action them, well then they become key creators in what goes on in Oberstown. So that's a really important feature. The final image there relates to recruitment. So in relation to the recruitment of any senior roles on campus who are going to be involved with young people, the young people are part of that process. So James has described there, whenever it was, I became the director. There was a 4-stage process. One of the stages involved having an interview with the young people. So 2 of the young people interviewed me as part of that process. That part of the process had a specific weight in relation to the overall campaign. My biggest anxiety that day, because I knew the kids obviously, was how do I prepare for this? What do I do? The biggest question was, do I wear a shirt and tie, do I wear a suit? And I did. I gave them the full value that I would give any other person interviewing me. And so that was reciprocated in the interview, whereby some of the questions were probably some of the most challenging questions I had in the process, because if I'd answered them wrong, or if I'd answered them right, well then I would have been toast, because they were really testing me. So that's just a small example of the campus effect. From a national perspective, and look, just pay attention to points number 2 and points number 2 and 4 in this. A recent visit from the Oireachtas Committee on Children. They got to meet with the young people's young people's committee, the campus council. A very engaging session with them, and I suppose this is a letter we received from the Oireachtas thanking us for the time, thanking us for the visit. And point number 2 the young people raised was the issue of aftercare for all children. How to bring young people who are in the children detention campus into that group, that they're not left out, because when kids leave Oberstown now, they're kind of in that adult market as well, because they're 18, they're gone beyond 18, and we all know the challenges in relation to education, employment and housing that's gone on at the minute. So really important that was raised at a political level. The 4th point then in relation to the increased use of detention and supervision orders. So there's some provision under legislation, and they're trying to move it now under amendments to the 2001 Act, whereby there would be an increased use of detention and supervision orders. And I plague the young people and tell them, when they talk to the solicitors, detention supervision, because what that means, a 12-month detention supervision order means you spend 6 months in Oberstown and you spend 6 months in the community being supervised by probation. So when you align that to the aftercare piece, and we've heard earlier on this morning the challenges of leaving a place of incarceration, it's really important that scaffolding is in place to allow people to have the best opportunity possible. Just going to focus on two of these images. The one in the middle centre there, the garden, that's the Rise Garden that was in bloom there maybe 2 years ago. The first time ever, I suppose, a children's detention campus delivered a garden in bloom, a national exhibition. And what this was the young people speaking to the nation, in fact, in relation to understand me, understand my journey, understand what I've been through, and create a different narrative in relation to young people. So in terms of advocating for the respect and the dignity that they deserve as citizens of Ireland, it was a key piece of engagement. We'd staff members in there over the weekend, and we had them prepped for this, because we knew there were going to be people coming up saying, lock them up, throw away the key, they're nothing but this, they're nothing but that, whatever. And on several occasions I seen some staff saying, just hang on a second there now, can I just test you on that? You have no idea what this young person has faced in their life. You have no idea what the adversity they've been through. You have no idea that this might have been a one-off or whatever. So just think about it, and think about our responsibility as a state and as a nation, because we have a very poor history of looking after people in institutions. Just think of our responsibility now in relation to what we had to do with these young people. And people left, members of the public left with tears in their eyes once they understood the story. Second picture I want you to look at is the judiciary there, the weighing scales, the judges piece. We would have regular engagement with the judiciary. We have the Judicial Council coming out next month at some point as well. But I suppose in terms of trying to get them to understand young people, because, you know, kids nowadays, they're all bigger, all stronger, all taller, because houses are better, food is better, all that stuff. And sometimes when a young person appears before a judge at 16 and a half years of age, 6'2", 16 stone, built like a shit brick house, the judge understands then that this is an adult I'm dealing with, where in fact the IQ could be 60, could be 70, it could be 10, 11, 12, a child in an adult's body. And there's a very recent example of a very serious case, and the young person, 100% your honour, 100% your honour, 100% your honour. That's all he kept saying. He hadn't a clue what was going on. He hadn't a clue what was going on. So when we talk to the judges about this, to understand that the kids are kids and you need to treat them like that. One of Gráinne's key points on this is that regularly young people, before going into court, will ask for lavender spray on their pillow to help them sleep the night before they go to court. This is 6'2", 16 stone monster, a child in a man's body who needs lavender to help him sleep. So just in terms of effect and change, this is the young people's voice. So from an international perspective, I suppose, how the young people have affected change. This is a program we were involved with the Netherlands, Helsinki, and YOPE, Young Perspectives, who were experts by experience. And what it was about creating a program called Walk in My Shoes, where the young people could meet with groups of staff and just talk about their experience, what caused them to come into offending, what their background was like. So it gives a greater understanding to everybody working with the kids. It was a European-wide initiative, and just to see this in action in Oberstown was really powerful. To see a young person at 16 years of age holding maybe 20 adults just by their story, letting them know what it was that caused them to get into the offending, and how they might need a little bit of help around that. The experts who from Holland who come over and supported this were actually blown away by the capabilities of young people at 16 and 17. So it was a key initiative, I suppose, in terms of advocating for the young people. If you understand me a little bit more, you'll be able to work with me a little bit harder and help me get to that point where I can maximise my potential. Again, another initiative that they were involved with, and this is a Europe-wide reach as well. I think it's 4 countries. I think it's Romania, Bulgaria, Spain and Ireland, Penal Reform Ireland or Penal Reform International, and the Mosaic data programme, whatever. It was looking at violence against children in detention and how the data is collected, what it looks like, and how we can make progress on that. And what our young people have actually done in relation to this, in relation to leading this, they have contributed to a systemic change as well in our case management system in relation to how we collect data with regard to violence against children in place of detention. And that's a Europe-wide initiative. So this is the power of advocacy, this is the power of participation, and by listening to young people we can co-create solutions. Look at some of the young people's voice, I suppose. I got a job working on a coffee trailer. We have a coffee van sponsored by Java Republic. Gráinne helped me. Advocacy officer talks about the right to food, right to education, the right to whatever. Every young person as part of their induction gets to meet with the advocacy officer and a designated liaison person as separate independent bodies within the campus. Now, when I say that separate independent body within the campus, people say surely they can't be independent. If you met Bill or you met Grania, you would realise they are independent, and to their detriment, at times, they've maintained that independence among the rest of the staff teams. So look, you need programs, you need to understand. If you don't learn, you'll be the same person forever. The next page, this struck me, I suppose, because you think about it. I don't have a relationship with my ma. I was crazy. Now I can ring her and ask her, are you all right? Now I can ring her and say to her, I love you. And for a young fella to say, you don't know the difference that makes to a young fella's life, that's powerful. So that's the effect of advocacy. A number of years ago, a guy called Noel Baker from the Irish Examiner spent a day with us just to try and figure out what goes on in Oberstown. And he produced a print media piece across 2 pages in a broadsheet, and and the online version was, it's a good little place. It's not like prison. There's people here who give a shit about you. But obviously, the print media was cleaned up a little bit. But what's really important is that the first 5 or 6 paragraphs of this are direct quotes from a young person in relation to, I come in here, I was a nuisance. I didn't get it. I fought the system. I realised what was going on. I got my head down. I got a little bit of help, and I drove on. So it speaks to that power of understanding where they're coming from, having someone to advocate for them, and giving them the tools to maximise their potential. So, Sinead, that's it from me, and look forward to some questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Damien. It was good that you emphasised the fact that they are children, and like you come under the remit of the Department of Children and Youth, not the Department of Justice, and people might forget that. You know, like, and as well with the co-production and the campus council and having them interview you, you know, it's all essential doing any form of youth work, and that giving them programs what you think is beneficial, but have them come in and get them around the table and have them come up with the programs themselves and have ownership of it. So thanks for that, Damien. Our next speaker is Susan McKay, Press Ombudsman. Susan is Ireland's Press Ombudsman, a role she was appointed to in 2022. She's a writer and worked as a journalist for many years, having been published widely, both nationally and internationally. In addition to this, she has a history in the NGO, having previously served as CEO of the National Women's Council and founder of the Belfast Rape Crisis Centre. Welcome up, Susan.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and many thanks to Ciara and all of her team for inviting me. I haven't been here to speak to this group before, but my colleague Bernie Grogan has had a lot of interaction with the IPRT, and I hope that we have learned a lot from that. It's actually great to have just heard Damien praising an article in journalism, because I think it's very easy to be entirely critical of the media, but there are some journalists who really do take their responsibilities to reporting social issues very seriously. And on that note, because yesterday we learned that the great Nell McCafferty had died, I actually thought I would start by reading just a short piece that Nell wrote in 1980. Actually, it was an introduction to a series of articles that she'd written called In the Eyes of the Law. And when I read you this, you'll notice some of the language that Nell uses is not language we would necessarily use now, but it was of its time, and it was really quite a groundbreaking approach that Nell took to writing about the courts and about justice and about prisoners and about the law. So, it is often said of courts that all human life is there. In the decade 1970 to 1980 that I spent in and around the courtrooms of the Republic of Ireland as a journalist with the Irish Times, I saw an astonishing parade come to answer the rule of law. Babies were held in arms in the children's court as the just decided where they would go. Cabinet ministers appeared in the dock. 8-year-olds who played football in the streets were brought in by guards and convicted. Businessmen who assaulted each other in discotheques brought charges and counter-charges. A mother of 13 children who stole trousers for her unemployed husband received a suspended sentence. Religion, sex and politics had a high profile. Members of the Hare Krishna movement were summoned for walking in the streets. The Maoists were convicted of posturing and sent to jail for contempt. Homosexuals were convicted. The state loitered in prosecuting a man charged with buggery, and he was released to molest 2 children before final conviction. Entire families, decimated and estranged, appeared in the dock, and neighbours besides. Husbands who beat up their wives and avoided paying maintenance were occasionally assaulted by their wives. Parents summoned their children. In-laws became outlaws after conviction. Neighbours accused each other, friends assaulted each other, some appeared surprised and confused after a night on the tiles. Winos and beggars were hauled in. Demented women, vague men and wandering children regularly trooped through. There was rail crime too: burglary, theft, forgery, stealing cars, all too often committed by men who began their careers in children's reformatories and were processed through St Patrick's, Mountjoy, Dundrum Mental Hospital and back to Mountjoy again, with occasional breaks in the fresh air and no hope of a life outside of institutional walls. The travelling people are regularly fined in pounds, shillings and pence and then released back to the bridges where they had begged, or sent to jail. People are found innocent of charges originally brought against them and then convicted of having resisted the guards in the course of arrest, or obstructing them, or assaulting them. A prison sentence is often imposed. While waiting for the law to take its course in the midst of this bedlam, people apply for bail and freedom. The relatives who come to buy them out are refused because the father is not earning enough, the mother is earning nothing, the credit union book is rejected, banks are thicker than blood. The law is subject to the season of the year. Around Christmas, the Justice promises jail for shoplifters, and it often depends on the personality of the Justice. One likes to jail drug addicts, another likes to put them under probation. In the 10 years that I spent in and around the courts, I learned that there is a clear distinction between law and justice. The parent who steals for food for the children is praised in parable and convicted in the court. The alcoholic who needs treatment is punished. The beggar who needs money is jailed. The person who goes to jail again and again is not rehabilitated and is sent back to jail again and again and again. Because these people have suffered more than enough by appearing in court in the first place, I never used their real names and addresses. I have named the justices who decided their fate. Hopefully this will have put them in the dock for a change. A change in the district courts of this country is urgently needed. And that's from 1981, and I'm sure that many of you will identify with a great deal that's in there, because, you know, things have changed and things haven't changed. My first serious job was as a worker in the Belfast Rape Crisis Centre, and that was actually in that same time of the early 80s. So my interest at that time was in prisons, was in campaigning to get rapists and men who beat up and murdered women put into them, and for as long periods as possible. This concern continued when I became a journalist. I sat through many criminal court cases, including that of Joseph McColgan, who abused his family for decades and was, I noted in journalism with satisfaction, given the longest sentence ever at that time handed out in an Irish court. However, I also knew from a very early stage in my working life that justice that was solely based on jailing violent men was never going to get rid of violence against women. It was clear that other kinds of intervention were needed and that a deeper understanding of the roots of crime was needed. I researched, for example, the history of Robert Howard, a serial rapist and murderer, and learned that he had been brutalised in a notorious reformatory run by one of the Catholic religious orders when he was a young child. I observed that a prisoner who went to jail hating women would come out hating them more unless something was done. So I wrote as a journalist a good bit about prison reform, and I visited most of the prisons in the Republic and in the North. I found it quite sad listening to Darina earlier talking about overcrowding and what comes with it, and the stunting of all the other services that comes with that, because I'm very keenly aware that the first time I visited the Docus Centre and the first time that I visited Limerick women's prisons, they looked amazing because they were brand new and journalists had been invited in to see them, and we were being told about all the wonderful facilities that they had. And of course, as Darina said, in no time flat, all of the rooms that were supposed to be for education and counselling and communication and chats and socialising were filled up with people who were having to sleep there in conditions that were never envisaged by the people who designed those prisons. Anyway, my work now as the Press Ombudsman is based on this tiny document, and this is the Code of Practice of the Press Council of Ireland, and it's a document which was designed and agreed by editors of the Irish newspapers and online print publications. I didn't bring copies of this today because we're actually making a couple of changes to it, and the new edition will be out very shortly, but all of our details will be distributed by the IPRT after the conference today. As Press Ombudsman, my primary role is to interpret and apply this code of practice, and the document has 11 principles in it, to which most of the newspapers, magazines and online publications in Ireland have signed up to. There's a preamble to the code, and it says a number of things about the spirit of the code and how it's supposed to be looked at. And it goes, I'll read you a couple of interesting paragraphs from it. The freedom to publish is vital to the right of the people to be informed. This freedom includes the right of a newspaper to publish what it considers to be news without fear or favour, and the right to comment upon it. So that bit's about the freedom of the press. The next bit is about the responsibilities that are entailed in that. Members of the press have a duty to maintain the highest professional and ethical standards. This code sets out the benchmark for those standards. And so my job is a balancing act between those two responsibilities, the responsibility of the press to tell the stories that people don't want told, and the responsibility of the press to observe the rules of decency and ethics that it has itself agreed to sign up to. The preamble also defines what's called the public interest. The general principle is, it says, that the public interest is invoked in relation to a matter capable of affecting the people at large, so that they may be legitimately interested, and the press legitimately interested in providing information about it. And I mentioned that because there is a legitimate public interest, obviously, in crime, in prisoners and in prisons. And this can sometimes be invoked by a publication which wants to justify what might otherwise be seen as a breach of certain principles in the Code of Practice. So the Press Ombudsman may or may not accept this defence. The public interest can't be used to defend breaches in relation to the kind of stories which just treat prisoners as fair game for salacious or dehumanising stories. The Press Council and the Office of the Press Ombudsman respect and uphold the interests of victims of crime, and our member publications to write about it. But it's vital also to note that the code is rooted in the values of freedom, responsibility and human rights, and that goes for prisoners as for any other citizens. In terms of the code, prisoners and their families and their advocates have the same rights to complain without fear or favour to the Press Ombudsman's Office as politicians and other powerful elements in Irish society. They have the right to expect the press to strive to tell the truth when writing about them, to refuse to accept comment and rumour being presented as facts, and to insist that news and information are obtained fairly and honestly. Privacy is a human right shared by prisoners and their families and protected by the Code of Practice. Prisoners and their families have a right to insist that court reports are fair and accurate. They must not be subject to media coverage that is intended or likely to cause grave offence or stir up hatred against them on the basis of race, religion, nationality, colour, ethnic origin, membership of the travelling community, gender, sexual orientation, marital status, disability, illness or age. Children in the families of prisoners have the same protection as other children. The notoriety or otherwise of a parent cannot be used as the sole justification for publishing details of their private lives. And it's really important to realise that the protection of the code is also available to family members of prisoners as well as those who advocate for them. The publication of excessive detail about the suicide of a prisoner is to be avoided, just as the same as it is for any other member of society. And a finding by the Press Ombudsman that a principle of the code has been breached in relation to a prisoner or their family must be published with the same due prominence as for any other person. So the Press Ombudsman's Office is part of a self-regulatory system. I think it was James earlier who mentioned a former Justice Minister called Michael McDowell. And Michael McDowell was at one stage making noises that he might be going to regulate the press on a statutory basis. And the newspaper industry very hastily decided that it would be better to set up a system of its own. But that doesn't mean that it's any less rigorous for that. It's not part of the legal system, but it is a very strictly regulated body. The Press Ombudsman doesn't issue judgments. What I do is to try to make decisions that support the press as it strives to uphold the highest standards to which its members have committed themselves. I also try to uphold the right of members of the public and the groups they choose to represent their interests when it comes to holding the press to account. As you in this room know, how the press represents prisoners influences how prisoners are perceived by readers, and that in turn influences politicians and decision makers in how they shape the justice system. Press coverage of prison issues and prisoner issues educates the public, but it can also reinforce prejudice and stereotypes. Paula and James spoke earlier about let 'em die attitudes and how prevalent they can actually be. So again, I refer to what Damien mentioned, the importance of quality journalism, where journalists have actually taken the trouble to go and talk to people and talk to the people running prisons as well about what is actually at stake here. The complaints system operated by the Press Ombudsman allows people to intervene in how their lives and their communities are represented in the press. That is really important, and I want to encourage you, if you think that prisoners and prisoners' rights issues have been represented unfairly or that a journalist has behaved badly in relation to any of these issues, look at the Press Council's Code of Practice and consider making a complaint to my office. Because I used to be a campaigning sort of journalist, a lot of people assumed that when I took this job that I would be able to initiate complaints about the press, and it's really important to say that I can't. All I can do is take complaints. So I quite often look at publications and think, wow, but people are bound to complain about that, and then they don't. And it's quite frustrating, you know, because there's a lot of bad journalism that could be eliminated if people just made their complaints properly about that. And you can get assistance from the Press Ombudsman's Office in doing that. We know in the Office of the Press Ombudsman that there are obstacles that can make it very hard for a prisoner to make a complaint. And we know, as has been stated here, that there are serious barriers to even getting information about how to make a complaint. We know that some prisoners have literacy issues, and it's really important to say that you can ask somebody else, whether that's a family member or a friend, or in some cases a solicitor, to make a complaint on your behalf. Or you can seek assistance from a support agency or service provider, and I'm sure that you can talk to the IPRT about these matters. It's also important to say that we can offer you support in doing so. You have 3 months from the date in which an article is published to do that. We remain one of the rare contemporary organisations that actually have a phone number and a phone which will be answered. That's why we get phone calls from people from all over the country who want to talk to somebody else, but realise that this organisation actually has a phone and helpful people at the other end. You can also find all the information you need on our website, and you can email ourselves. Myself and the case manager, Bernie Grogan, are very keen to do talks about our work to groups, including inside prisons, and that has been done in the past by the office. We've just appointed a part-time communications worker, and she's going to help us to extend our outreach, and we are going to produce shortly a new leaflet for prisoners and people working with prisoners about how to make complaints. So, as James mentioned earlier, there's no use having a right if you don't know about it. So we would urge you to, you know, when we get the information about prisoners out, to circulate it as widely as possible. And in the meantime, do please feel free to contact us and to make your complaints. They're what will help us to make the Irish press better. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Susan. Usually when we think of press and issues around crime and justice, we think of victims. Mary Crillian Cork runs the online Fix Day campaign, where she holds press accountable for their headlines around women victims. So, for example, sex worker raped and murdered, she'd quote them and say, mother, daughter, woman. Do you know what I mean? So, but we don't really think about press and prisoners' rights. But when you think about it, should people have the right to be forgotten? Do people have the right to move on? Like if you're multiple years away from your past life and an employer can do a Google search and that article is there any way we can apply to have that removed? Maybe that's a question we can put to Susan later on, but we're going to move on.
I can answer.
Go for it.
Yes, you can ask to be anonymised, and you can do that retrospectively. You can contact us and say, for precisely the reasons you mentioned,
Okay.
want your name removed.
Okay, that's great. You're going to have a huge influx of people. Myself included. Okay. Last but definitely not least, Áine Bhreathnach, Senior Solicitor of IHREC, Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. Áine specialises in the promotion and vindication of rights under human rights and anti-discrimination law, and she has represented the Commission before the Superior Court's friend of the Court in cases of national importance on issues such as transitional justice and redress. Prior to working in the Commission, she worked in criminal defence practice and immigration practice. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here today. Thank you, IPRT, for inviting me. And I'm delighted, I suppose, to be here to bridge and to foster collaboration between IHREC, IPRT and other organisations working to advance the rights of prisoners. I know I'm the last speaker before lunch, and it's been a great morning, but it's also been a long morning. So I'll try and keep this as whistle-stop as I can, but try and get as much information in as possible. As James mentioned, I'm a solicitor. I work in the legal team within IHREC. I personally represent people whose rights have been violated, so people who can take cases under the Equality Acts or through the Superior Courts. I also represent the Commission in the Superior Courts. Today, though, I'm here to speak and I represent IHREC today, so I'm going to talk about some of the work that we do across the teams within IHREC. To give you a flavour of the work that we have done across the organisation to advance the rights of prisoners. As I'm sure many of you know, IHREC is the National Human Rights and Equality body. Our mandate is set out in the 2014 Act, but our work is determined by 15 Commissioner members through the strategy statement. I'm sure many of you know, but that strategy statement is currently being developed for the next 2-year cycle. So if you haven't contributed to the consultation process and you want to, there's still an opportunity to do that, so you can have a look at that. IHREC's work on prisoners' rights and advancing prisoners' rights really reflects the title of the conference today: Access to Information on Rights, Complaints and Remedies and Advocacy. That really covers the broad range of work that we have done today. As you can see, our logo is on this conference today, and Ciara mentioned that it was part of the annual grant funding scheme. I know that there are many NGOs and organisations here today, but what I would mention is that we do have an annual grant funding scheme. I think it starts in February or March every year, but we've funded a number of research papers, but also information papers as well. So if your organisation is interested in that, it would be very prudent to get in touch with IHREC in and around that time. So I know that we funded, for example, Gemma's work in relation to the equality of access to information, that was published by South Leinster Citizens Information in relation to the prison in the Midlands. We've also published papers in conjunction with IPRT in relation to the rights of detained persons in secure forensic mental health facilities. Again, in conjunction with IPRT, but also NUI Maynooth in relation to the experiences of foreign national and minority ethnic groups in penal in the Irish penal system, and Dr. Áine spoke about that earlier today. And also with NUIG and Irish penal reform in relation to the rights of people with disabilities. So there's a broad range of work that IHREC have funded over the years, and I think it is a really, really good programme. And as everybody, I think, has mentioned today, there's a dearth of information available to prisoners. There's a dearth of modes of how information is delivered to prisoners. So that grant programme might be an avenue where people could access where information could be developed in different ways for prisoners to access. So I suppose that's where I would leave it. We have highlighted that, and I'm sure we've added to the work of Darina already, and I'm afraid we'll be mentioning this. I'll be mentioning this throughout the day. But one of the key concerns of IHREC through our policy and advocacy work is that there is a lack of information to prisoners. We recently wrote a report to the European Commission on the Prevention of Torture and Inhuman and Degrading Treatment. There will be a visit of that committee coming to the country soon, and one of the questions that we've asked them to look at is the availability of information to prisoners, but also the gaps in the information to prisoners and the gaps in how it's delivered. We've talked about translations before, ISL interpreters, literacy skills and so. So we've asked the committee to look at that. I've specifically been asked to speak about complaints and remedies. And again, not to add to Darina's work, but and it's been mentioned before, but the complaint system within the prison service really has been criticised for many, many years. And I appreciate that there's many, many difficulties with this. However, again, it's part of IHREC's advocacy strategy and a part of one of those things that we raise again, both at national level, but also at international level, that there has to be an adequate complaint system. Without a robust complaint system, there will be no remedy. Then there's really, it can't be restated. So to a certain extent, the issue of remedies is null and void if there's no effective complaint system. Again, we raised it in June 2024 again with the European Committee for the Prevention, the European Committee on the Committee Against Torture. They will be coming to visit and they will be asking a further question from the prison service of when this will happen. We know that there's been some progress towards developing a system with the Ombudsman, but that has been very, very slow and it's been delayed for a number of years. Similarly, in relation to the bill for the inspection of places of detention, we're also asking the committee to follow up on that, because without a complaint system, without an inspection system and that coordination role in place, there's really no progress that will be made. I suppose that's the start of it, and that's quite a depressing start, that there is no effective complaint system in place. There's a few things that I do want to kind of refer to in with some of the work that kind of may provide a chink of light or may provide a hook with which organisations may be able to push the prison system to further their commitments to advance prisoners' rights. Section 42 of the IHREC Act imposes a statutory obligation on public bodies to perform their functions, to have regard to eliminate discrimination, promote equality of opportunity and protect the rights of staff. So under that, the Irish Prison Service has a duty to assess, address and report under equality, discrimination and to protect the rights of staff. Now I do have to say the Irish Prison Service was one of the first organisations that came involved in this project. They were one of the first to publish an action plan on that. They did a 2023 update, I think. I don't think it's in their new strategy statement, but I think it comes within a further action plan, so I'm sure that will be delivered. And I understand again that's something that the Committee for the Prevention Against Torture will be following up with the prison service in the coming weeks and months. But again, in terms of a tool that could be used perhaps by NGOs, the prison service on its website has set out what its commitment will be, and some of those commitments are quite interesting in terms of they've set out that they will do certain information awareness on rights to prisoners, how they will follow up on that, and you can follow up then with prison service as to whether they've done that or not, and that's something that IHREC does as well. In relation to complaints on human rights violations, so the very serious violations, IHREC has intervened in a number of cases over the years, primarily as amicus curiae or as a friend of the court. So, for example, we intervened in the Oberstown child detention cases, which involved allegations that children were detained in conditions amounting to solitary confinement in Oberstown. So we intervened in that case, but that was as kind of a specialist expert to the court on human rights issues. We've intervened in McDonnell versus Governor of Whitfield Prison in relation to human rights issues regard to the isolation of prisoners for their own safety. And we've intervened on the principle of the obligation of the prohibition of imprisonment on the ground of your inability to pay a debt. So IHREC have intervened to advance the rights of prisoners, not necessarily representing individual people, but participating in court proceedings as a specialist or as an expert in those issues. One of the issues that I would like to highlight today, there's been many kind of concerns raised in relation to access to rights for minority groups that has been raised. And something that I haven't seen in my practice to date is cases from prisoners under the Equality Acts. And I think there may be an opportunity there to advance prisoners' rights through the Equality Acts. So discrimination under the Equality Act is when someone treats you worse or less favourably than another person. And the Equality Acts also protect against sexual harassment and harassment. And harassment is when it violates your dignity or it's intimidating and hostile. This type of complaint has to be linked with protected ground, such as gender, civil status, family status, sexual orientation, religion, age, disability, race, or membership of the traveller community. I'm aware from reading the reports that IHREC has commissioned that, for example, people with disabilities in prison aren't aware that they have an entitlement to reasonable accommodation. I'm aware that people from minority ethnic groups or from minority groups in Ireland, such as member of the travellers community, aren't protected from harassment within the prison by reason of membership of their membership of the traveller community or another ethnic group. And I do think there's an avenue there to further the rights of individuals within the prison system over those. However, there are obstacles and there are difficulties. Firstly, how do they get that information? IHREC provide a lot of information. We have a Your Rights service, but it is on our website. And all that information is in print. How, again, it's to do with what Gemma was talking about earlier. How do prisoners access this information? Do they have access to the internet? Is it translated? All of those things. How do you make a complaint? A prisoner can't file a complaint with the WRC. Do they have access to that online portal? How would they follow up? How would they do it? Also, legal aid is not available for persons to take a case under the Equality Acts. So you've no automatic or legal right to a lawyer or a solicitor to represent you. But there are severe issues in terms of lack of access to information or translation, lack of access to education, because you can't speak the language or you can't go to the school. And these cases haven't been taken. I wouldn't over-egg it. These are very, very difficult cases to take. There aren't many that have been taken in Ireland. There are more cases taken in the UK, and we can learn from those. However, they do have their challenges. And again, it depends on the right case at the right time. But I do think there is an opportunity there, and there's a gap not just in the information provided to prison, how it's provided, that could really focus on protecting the rights of particularly minorities within the prison service. I'm not sure what the time is, but I suppose just by way of approach, I do think there are opportunities and there are gaps that are there, but I think a multi-agency approach is necessary, both between the bodies and between NGOs, in order to deliver compliance with our national, European and international obligations.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I was just thinking about questions. Anybody want to ask a question? We'll go 5 minutes. Yeah.
Hiya, thanks. It's for Susan McKay. So obviously complaints are really important for, when reports are made that may be offensive or inaccurate or damaging. But obviously in most cases the damage is already done. So the question is there a role for the Ombudsman, or indeed a mechanism already in place whereby people may get in touch with your office or appeal for something that they know is kind of up and coming report, like say there's like a case pending or something that they know is going to go really public. Is there any way that people can make an appeal ahead of maybe some damaging reports being made?
It's a really interesting question, and I'm not entirely sure how to answer you correctly. Certainly, I can issue press advisory notices, which would be like the last one that I did was after the attack on the children outside the Penal Square school. The school asked me if I would ask the press to back off when the children were coming back in again, because they anticipated that it was going to be already very traumatic for the families and the children to go back to school after that terrible incident and all the stuff that followed it. And so I did that, and the press did stay away. So in some circumstances I can do that. I mean, there are circumstances in which you can get advice from us on, say, applying to a court not to allow certain details to be reported. And if a judge then makes a ruling on that, then we would be able to hold the case to account and then go ahead and publish that stuff. But in general, my powers in relation to court cases, court reports are very, very limited, because the press holds very, very firmly to its right and responsibility to be the eyes and ears of the people when it comes to the courts, and that's constitutionally protected. So unfortunately, a lot of stuff does get reported in relation to court cases that people would prefer. That is in basic people's privacy and so on. But in terms of other aspects, it's worth contacting us if there is some particular circumstance. But I would be fairly sure that I would be quite limited in what I could do in relation to that. But I would certainly think about that question, because it's kind of important. But certainly, making complaints where you feel that people have been treated unfairly or people's rights have been trampled on is really important in just kind of establishing what is regarded by the press as being normal and acceptable. And that's sort of what my office is supposed to do. It's supposed to sort of reflect what people want in terms of protection of their rights.
Sheila?
Susan, can I give you a suggestion? One possible suggestion that might help in relation to that, because I'm very aware, particularly for our women who are very, very vulnerable in the court process, and that they are so, just within a justice system, even more vulnerable than the men are. But because the press have a tendency to publish some people's full addresses. And you've got a vulnerable woman whose address is exposed, or her children's address is exposed when she goes to prison. Which is totally unnecessary, and we could just simply even write an area if we have to do it at all. It's very simple guidelines like that could make a world of a difference in people's lives and people's safety, and being allowed to move on and not being judged to the level that the press inflict it on people.
Just in relation to that, there is a question for the press about their practice of publishing people's addresses is to protect them against claims from other people who might have the same name and live in the same area. So they will defend their right to do that. But there have certainly been cases to the Press Ombudsman's office where breaches have been upheld on the basis that unnecessary information is given, particularly in relation to where children live and the identity of children.
Or a woman who died.
Yes, exactly. Yes, and there have been cases where those kind of decisions have been made. But I would actually be very interested in talking to you about that and about how it might be possible to push the boundaries on that.
Yeah, so we can have one more question by Paula.
I feel like Sheila's getting picked on here because mine is for you too as well. Susan. I was just going to ask around the regulation around the language that's used in the press, because people who use drugs, people who are in our prison, like you can't put racial slurs, there's discrimination laws for all that, but it's fair game to use words like junkie, all this and all in the press. And I remember we actually put in a complaint with IHREC. I was doing a bit of voluntary work with IHREC at the time, and it was around the time that the legislation was passed for the safer injection facility, and a well-known, I won't say his name, councillor, put the headline on the thing was Junkie Haven. And like that, we put that in. That was never retracted or anything. It's like it's fair game for the people that we'd work with to be discriminated against, and there's no comeback, no support, no nothing for them. when it comes to it.
Certainly, if I got a complaint that was about use of derogatory language and it was made under, for example, principle 8, which is about prejudice, I would consider that to be a very serious complaint in terms of the likelihood that it would succeed. I mean, I said to you about Penal's piece, she referred to that to winos. We wouldn't talk about winos now, and there was another word that she used, I can't remember what it was, but it was one that wouldn't be used today. So I definitely think that standards are improving in that regard. I honestly cannot see a newspaper today publishing a piece with a headline about junkies. I think I think there was a complaint, to my recollection, because I've been reading all our past complaints recently, because I've only been in the job for a little bit. But there was one in which a complaint was upheld due to the use of language like junkies and other things like that. And there has certainly been complaints upheld in relation to derogatory language in relation to travellers. But it's something I would be very keen to. I'm not bound to make the same. I'm not bound by prerogative like judges are. And I can decide something which is different to what was decided in the past. And I would certainly take use of derogatory language very seriously in terms of perpetuating stereotypes and increasing hatred against people. And I'm also I've been working with Gary in the sale about issues to do with vulnerability and informed consent in terms of getting interviews with people, and all of those things are definitely aspects of my office that, having been a journalist, I would very much like to advance.
Yeah, and we can take the discussions into the lunch, Áine, so thanks for that. A bowl of us.